Okay, let's get started with our think about it. On our board, we have two things. At the top of our board, we have our number line, and at the bottom of our board, we have three questions and directions about how to work with this number line. So let's look at A, right at the bottom of our board. It says, labeling the number line has been started for you. Label all of the hash marks to the left of 0. So when I first look at my number line, I'm going to pay attention to three important things. First, I'm going to identify 0 on my number line. It's pretty simple because it's labeled for me already and it's right there in the middle, so I'm just going to put a little arrow so I know where 0 is. And then the second thing I'm going to look at is what kind of numbers I already have on my number line. So I have the numbers 0 through 5. And I can see that all of my numbers on the right side of 0 are positive numbers. I'm also going to pay attention to the scale of the number line. We just learned that word, scale, when we were writing down our vocabulary squares. As we saw in our definition, the scale is the distance from one mark to another. So I'm just paying attention to how many numbers or how many values are represented between each number. So here I can see that it goes 0, 1, 2, 3. So I know that it's just adding 1 every time there's a new line. So my scale is 1. Okay, so now I need to fill in the numbers to the left of my 0. Since I already have positive numbers here, I'm going to be recording my negative numbers because they're all numbers that are to the left of 0 or that are less than 0. I also know that my scale is 1, so I know that each line is just going to represent one more digit. So my first one is going to be -1, that's 1 less than 0. Second line, -2, -3, -4, -5. So if you haven't started doing so yet, I want you to write down this number line in your journal. Don't worry about making it super pretty, just make sure that it has your dash marks, all of your numbers labeled, so you have your negative signs on the left, you have positive numbers on the right of 0. You're going to use this number line that you're writing in your journal to help you answer questions B and C on the next slide. So let's read them together, and then we will move to the next slide where you are going to write an answer to two questions by yourself. B says, what is the relationship between 2 and -2? So you're going to have to look at your number line and identify where is +2 and where is -2. And what do you notice about those two numbers? Are there any similarities? What is the relationship between them? Let's take a look at C. Name two numbers that have the same distance from 0. So you're going to have to look at your number line and start with 0 and then count your steps that it takes to get to certain numbers. See if any two numbers on your number line have the same distance from 0. Okay, go ahead, click to the next slide. We are going to get started with answering those two questions. I'll see you back here for our conjecture. Okay. It is really great to see everyone participating in those two questions, and I was really liking the answers that I saw, so hopefully you're feeling okay about that. I do want to say that the relationship between 2 and 2 were that they were the same distance from 0. So if you went and counted those spaces, you would have seen that it took 2 spaces to get to 0 from +2 and 2 spaces to get to 0 from -2. you can look down at your number line on your journal and double check that statement that I just made to make sure that I'm right. Okay, let's get started with testing our conjecture. So number 1 says, what are the absolute values of -6 and 6? Absolute value is another vocab word that we just learned. I'm going to box that word because that's super important in my question. When we learned our vocab word, we also learned that when we're looking for absolute value of a number, we put that number into brackets, or if you remember, those 2 straight lines. So let's start by writing down both of our values in the absolute value bracket lines. I would like you to write whatever I write on your journal. So we have the absolute value of -6. So I'm going to draw my line, -6, and my other bracket line. Okay, so I just have 2 straight lines and -6 in the middle. And then my absolute value of +6 looks very similar, 2 straight lines and +6 in the middle. So say equals for both of these, and now I need to find the absolute value of them. I think the best way to do this is to draw a number line. So I'm going to do that down here, and you can do that in your journal as well. So let's draw our line, straight line with 2 arrows on either side, and in the middle we're going to write 0. So now I'm just going to draw my hash marks on either side of 0, and I'm going to draw 6 of them because I know I need 6 lines here so I can work with the numbers -6 and +6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then on the left side I also will need 6 hash marks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Take a moment to get that down in your journal, and then we're going to start labeling our numbers on the number line. Let's start by labeling our positive numbers because we're all such geniuses when it comes to the positive numbers on the number line. We're just going to assume that the scale is 1, so every line just represents 1 additional number. And we're going to assume that because it doesn't tell us that the scale is anything else. So anytime that it doesn't tell us what the scale is, we're just going to assume that it's 1. So let's start marking our positive numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Great. And then on the other side, we're going to need our negative numbers, which means we cannot forget to write our negative sign in front of every number. So 1 less than 0 is -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6. Okay. We're almost there to figuring out what is our absolute value of -6 and 6. The last step that we have to take to figure this out is count the amount of spaces that it takes to get from -6 to 0 and that it takes to get from +6 to 0. Because as we know, the absolute value is the distance from the number to 0. So let's start with +6. So we'll start at +6 and we're going to move all the way to 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So between 6 and 0 there's 6 spaces. And then now we're going to go to the left side of our number line and start at -6 and count the spaces that it takes to get to 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the amount of spaces that it takes to get from -6 to 0 is also 6. So that means that the absolute value of -6 is 6, and the absolute value of +6 is 6, And let's compare this to our definition. We saw that the absolute value is the distance that it takes to get from our number to 0. So we did that. And we also saw in our definition that the absolute value is always positive. Look at our two answers. Are they positive? Yes, they are. So we have found the absolute value of -6 and 6. Okay, let's move on to number 2. Number 2 says, what are the absolute values of -18? So we have two negative signs there. That's really important to realize. And of -18. So I have to ask myself, what does two negative signs mean? So I know that -18 is a negative number. And I know that -18 falls on the left of 0, but what about when I have negative of a negative? That means the opposite of a negative. The opposite of a negative is a positive. So when I see these two negative signs, I know that that's actually a positive number because it's the opposite of negative. So when I see that, I'm going to draw a little positive sign to remind myself that that's really +18. Okay, so now I'm going to draw my number line, and I'm going to put +18 on the number line and -18 on the number line to find out the absolute value of +18 or the absolute value of -18 and the absolute value of -18. So I'm going to draw a long number line because I know I need to get up to 18 on either side. I'm going to draw my 0 in the middle. And now I'm going to start with my hash marks. While I'm doing this on the board, I would like you to do this in your journal. We're counting up to 18 on both sides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. You can see that sometimes I drew my lines in the bigger spaces that I had available on the right side of my number line. I didn't do them completely in order, but that's just because I kind of ran out of space. As long as I have 18 lines there is really what matters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, so now I can label my numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, that was hard. Okay, let's do the same thing on the left side. Don't forget your negative signs. If you need to draw -1 down here, -2 up here, you can do that if that doesn't get too confusing to you, but I'm going to keep mine all on the bottom, even though it's going to be a little tight for space. -2, 3, -4, -5, -6, -7, -8, -9, -10, oh, -11, -12, -13, -14, -15, -16, -17, -18, all the way at the end. Whew, okay. It's messy number line. Ideally, we'd have a big board in the classroom so we could see all of these clearer, but we are going to work with this. The next and most important step is counting the spaces it takes to get from 18 to 0 and -18 to 0. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 spaces. So I'll draw that down here so I don't forget. It took 18 spaces. And let's start at negative 18 and do the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Also 18 spaces. So we know that these two numbers, 18 and negative 18, are opposite numbers because they are the same distance from 0 and they have opposite signs. We also know that they have the same absolute value because when we counted the distance, it was 18 spaces for both. We saw the same case for negative 6 and positive 6. They were the opposites and they had the same absolute value, which was 6. So that leads me to believe that there's a relationship between opposite numbers and the absolute value. On the next slide, you're going to write down what do you think the relationship is or the rule about opposites and absolute value. When you come back, we're going to stamp our conjecture before you start practicing some of this on your own. Okay, so hopefully you notice that opposite numbers like negative 6 and 6 or negative 18 and 18 have the same absolute value. So opposite quantities have the same absolute. Go ahead and jot down that sentence, opposite quantities have the same absolute value, right under all of the work that you just did in your journal. Okay, you all did a fantastic job with the lesson today. So let's go over what we learned. We learned how to put negative numbers on a number line. We learned what the scale is, so that's just the distance between one hash mark to the next. So usually it will be 1 unless it tells you something different. And then we also learned that opposite quantities have the same absolute value or the same distance from 0. So you're going to use all of those key points that we learned and you are going to be applying them to some practice on your own. I'm really excited to see what you all can do.